An elderly mother, devastated by her biological children's neglect, confided in her adopted daughter living abroad. Alarmed, the daughter rushed home, set up a hidden camera, and was horrified by the shocking truth it revealed. Clara, an elderly woman whose heart aches from the absence of affection, finds herself trapped in the solitude that seems to have engulfed her life. Despite the years she dedicated to raising her children, Bruno and Eduardo, she now faces an overwhelming sense of neglect. The days are long and the nights even longer, as she yearns for the warmth of their company, a simple visit or even a phone call that never seems to come. It's as if the years of sacrifice and love she poured into them have been forgotten, left to wither away like old memories in the corners of an abandoned room. Clara's frustration grows not out of anger, but from the deep-seated sadness of being unseen by those who once depended on her for everything. In her moments of introspection, Clara often reflects on the small things, like how she used to rush to comfort Bruno when he scraped his knee, or how Eduardo's laughter filled the house with joy. Now those memories are bittersweet, overshadowed by the stark reality of her current situation. Her attempts to reach out are met with silence or the hurried excuses of her sons, who seem to have moved on with their lives, leaving her behind like a distant memory. This indifference cuts deeper than any physical pain, a wound that time alone cannot heal. The loneliness is palpable, and every day feels like a battle against the creeping despair that threatens to consume her spirit. Clara's relationship with her sons has become a one-way street, with her reaching out time and time again, only to be met with cold indifference. It's a harsh reality that many elderly parents face as their children, caught up in their own lives, forget the importance of the bond that once held them together. Clara's longing for a connection with her sons becomes a silent plea for recognition, for the acknowledgement that she still exists in their lives, not just as a duty or an obligation, but as a mother who still cares deeply for them. But as the days pass, that hope fades, replaced by the painful realization that she might be alone in this fight. Her frustration isn't just rooted in the lack of attention. It's also about the broken promises. Clara remembers the countless times her sons assured her that they would always be there for her, that she would never have to worry about being alone in her old age. But now those words seem hollow, empty echoes of a time when things were different. The contrast between the promises made and the reality she faces is stark, leaving her to wonder what went wrong, where the love she once knew has gone. It's a question that lingers in her mind, gnawing at her sense of self-worth. Clara's experience serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of nurturing relationships, especially as we age. It's easy to take for granted the people who have always been there, assuming they will continue to be, regardless of how little effort we put into maintaining those bonds. But as Clara's story shows, neglect can lead to a deep sense of abandonment and isolation, feelings that no one should have to endure, especially in their later years. It's a wake-up call to those who may have let their connections with loved ones slip, urging them to reach out before it's too late. And so with a heavy heart, Clara prepares herself for another day of silence, another day of waiting for a call that may never come. The walls of her home, once filled with laughter and life, now echo with the quiet hum of loneliness. But even in this, there is a glimmer of hope, a small part of her that still believes her sons will remember the bond they share. Perhaps tomorrow will be different, she thinks. Perhaps tomorrow they will realize the depth of her love and the pain of her solitude. As days turned into weeks, Clara's hopes of reconnecting with her sons began to wane. Bruno and Eduardo, once the center of her world, now seemed to have little room for her in their busy lives. Whenever Clara mustered the courage to reach out, her calls were met with rushed responses or worse, unanswered. The excuses became a familiar refrain. "I'm swamped with work, Mom," or "I'll call you back later, okay?" But later never came. The cold indifference of her children felt like a knife, twisting deeper with each dismissive response, a painful reminder that she was no longer a priority in their lives. Clara's attempts to express her needs were often met with irritation. When she mentioned her struggles, how difficult it had become to handle daily tasks on her own, or how lonely she felt, their reactions were far from comforting. Bruno would sigh heavily, as if her words were an inconvenience, while Eduardo's voice would tighten, suggesting impatience rather than concern. It wasn't that they didn't care, Clara thought. Perhaps they were just too caught up in their own lives to notice the depth of her distress. Yet this rationalization did little to ease the sting of their neglect. She began to feel more like a burden than a beloved mother. The indifference of her sons wasn't just a personal heartbreak for Clara. It was a reflection of a broader issue that many elderly parents face. In a world that moves at a relentless pace, the elderly often find themselves forgotten, their needs overshadowed by the pressing demands of their children's careers and social lives. Clara's situation serves as a stark reminder of the importance of family bonds and how easily they can fray when taken for granted. It's a lesson that resonates with many, urging them to pause and consider the quiet desperation that might be simmering beneath the surface of their own family dynamics. Even when Clara did manage to have a conversation with Bruno or Eduardo, it often felt like they were just going through the motions. The warmth that once colored their interactions had faded, replaced by a mechanical politeness that only deepened her sense of isolation. Clara would try to share something from her day, a walk she took, a memory that surfaced, but her words seemed to fall into a void, met with half-hearted ahas and "That's nice, Mom." The emotional distance between them had grown so wide that it seemed insurmountable, leaving Clara to wonder if they even realized how much their indifference was hurting her. In these moments of disconnect, Clara couldn't help but reflect on the irony of her situation. She had always been there for her sons, sacrificing her own needs and desires to ensure they had everything they needed. But now, when she needed them the most, they were nowhere to be found. It was as if the roles had reversed, with Clara now the one who felt abandoned and unloved. This reversal of fortunes is a painful reality for many elderly parents who find themselves grappling with the stark contrast between the love they gave and the neglect they receive in return. Yet despite everything, Clara held on to a fragile hope that things might change. Perhaps, she thought, if they could see how much their indifference was affecting her, they might finally understand. But how could she convey the depth of her loneliness and the impact of their neglect without sounding like she was complaining? It was a delicate balance, one that Clara struggled with daily, and so she continued to wait, hoping that one day Bruno and Eduardo would realize the error of their ways and reach out to her, not out of obligation, but out of genuine love and concern. As Clara's feelings of neglect deepened, the tension between her biological sons and her adopted son, Lucas, became more pronounced. Bruno, in particular, couldn't hide his resentment toward Lucas. He saw Lucas not just as an outsider, but as a rival for their mother's affection, a rivalry that Bruno felt he was losing. While Bruno and Eduardo drifted away, Lucas had always remained a constant in Clara's life, despite living thousands of miles away in Europe. It was Lucas who called regularly, who made sure Clara was taken care of, and this only fueled Bruno's bitterness. The bond that Lucas shared with Clara was something Bruno couldn't understand, and it ate away at him. Bruno's resentment wasn't just about the attention Lucas gave their mother. It was about the comparison that Bruno inevitably made. Every time Lucas did something kind or thoughtful, Bruno saw it as a reflection of his own shortcomings. The more Lucas showed care and concern, the more Bruno felt inadequate, which only widened the emotional chasm between them. Bruno's jealousy simmered just beneath the surface, and while he rarely expressed it openly, Clara could sense the tension whenever Lucas was mentioned. This unspoken rivalry created a toxic undercurrent in the family, one that was slowly eroding what little connection remained between Clara and her biological sons. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Clara. Here was Lucas, her adopted son who had no biological ties to her, yet he was the one who truly acted like a son. He showed the love, respect, and dedication that she had always hoped for from Bruno and Eduardo. But instead of bringing the family closer together, Lucas's presence seemed to drive a wedge between them. Bruno couldn't see Lucas's actions for what they were, genuine love and concern for a mother who needed it. Instead, Bruno saw them as a challenge, a reminder of what he wasn't doing, and this only deepened his resentment. In moments of quiet reflection, Clara would wonder how things had come to this. She had always tried to treat her children equally, to love them without distinction. But now the divide was clear, and it pained her to see her family fractured by jealousy and bitterness. Clara knew that Lucas wasn't to blame. He was simply doing what any loving son would do. But Bruno's inability to see past his own insecurities meant that every act of kindness from Lucas was perceived as an attack. This perception not only strained Bruno's relationship with Lucas, but also with Clara, who was caught in the middle of a conflict she never intended. The tension reached a boiling point whenever Bruno and Lucas were in the same room. Their interactions were strained, filled with unspoken accusations and simmering anger. Bruno would make cutting remarks veiled in sarcasm, while Lucas would respond with calmness, refusing to be drawn into a confrontation. But this only seemed to infuriate Bruno more, as if Lucas's composure was a silent judgment on his own behavior. Clara, watching from the sidelines, felt helpless, unsure of how to mend the rift that had formed between her sons. It was a painful reminder that even the strongest family bonds could be tested by jealousy and resentment. Despite the growing tension, Clara held on to the hope that her sons would find a way to reconcile. She longed for the day when Bruno could see Lucas not as a rival, but as a brother, who loved their mother just as much as he did. But as the days passed, that hope seemed more and more distant. The comparisons Bruno made were tearing the family apart, and Clara feared that if something didn't change soon, the damage might be irreversible. The rift between her sons was growing wider, and Clara could only watch as her family teetered on the brink of falling apart. Lucas had always felt a deep connection to Clara, one that transcended the usual boundaries of familial love. It was during one of their regular calls that Lucas first noticed the subtle changes in Clara's voice, the hesitancy, the unspoken sorrow that she tried to hide. Concerned, he pressed her gently until she revealed the loneliness and neglect she was experiencing. Lucas's heart ached as he listened, and he knew he couldn't stay away any longer. The thought of his mother suffering alone was unbearable, so he made the decision to return home, leaving behind his life in Europe to be by her side. Upon his return, Lucas found the house eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the warmth and liveliness he remembered from his childhood. The atmosphere was heavy with a tension he couldn't quite place, but he knew something was deeply wrong. Clara's initial joy at seeing him was tinged with a sadness that she couldn't fully mask. Lucas didn't need to ask. He could see it in the way she moved, in the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Determined to understand the full extent of what was happening, Lucas decided to take matters into his own hands. He suspected that something more sinister was at play, and he wasn't about to let his mother suffer in silence. Lucas's instincts led him to take a drastic step, installing a hidden camera in Clara's home. It wasn't an easy decision, but his concern for her safety outweighed any reservations he might have had about invading her privacy. He needed to know the truth, to see for himself what was happening when he wasn't there. The camera was discreetly placed, capturing everything that occurred in the living room, where most of Clara's interactions with Bruno and Eduardo took place. Lucas hoped that his suspicions were unfounded, but the unease in his gut told him otherwise. He was prepared for anything, but nothing could have prepared him for what he would eventually uncover. The days that followed were tense as Lucas reviewed the footage, hoping to find nothing out of the ordinary. But as he watched, his worst fears were confirmed. The recordings revealed conversations between Bruno and Eduardo that chilled Lucas to the bone. They spoke of Clara as if she were an obstacle, discussing her in cold, calculating tones that made Lucas's blood boil. They talked about how to manage her, how to keep her out of the way so they could control her pension. The words were like poison, seeping into Lucas's consciousness and igniting a fury he struggled to contain. This was not just neglect, it was a betrayal of the highest order. Lucas couldn't believe what he was hearing. The brothers he had grown up with, the men he had once admired, were conspiring against their own mother. The betrayal was so deep, so absolute, that it left Lucas reeling. He felt a surge of anger mixed with a profound sadness, anger at his brothers for their cruelty, and sadness for Clara, who had done nothing to deserve such treatment. Lucas knew he had to act, but he also knew that confronting them directly would only lead to more lies and denial. He needed a plan, something that would bring their actions into the light for all to see. And so he began to devise a strategy, one that would not only protect Clara, but also expose Bruno and Eduardo for who they truly were. Lucas's decision to return home and install the hidden camera was the first step in what would become a battle for justice. He wasn't just fighting for his mother's safety. He was fighting for her dignity, for the respect and care that she deserved. The stakes were high, and Lucas knew that this was only the beginning. As he prepared for the confrontation that was sure to come, he steeled himself for the challenges ahead. This wasn't just a family dispute. It was a fight for what was right, and Lucas was determined to see it through to the end. The truth, as captured by the hidden camera, was more horrifying than Lucas could have ever imagined. Sitting alone in the dim light of his room, he replayed the footage, his heart sinking deeper with every word he heard. Bruno and Eduardo weren't just neglecting Clara. They were plotting against her, coldly discussing plans to drug her and force her into an asilo where they could easily control her pension. The way they spoke, devoid of any compassion or remorse, made it clear that this wasn't a decision they had arrived at lightly. It was a calculated, premeditated act of betrayal, one that revealed just how far they had fallen from the sons Clara had raised. Lucas felt a wave of nausea as he continued to listen. The betrayal was almost too much to comprehend. His brothers, the same men he had shared his childhood with, were willing to sacrifice their own mother's well-being for financial gain. It was a level of cruelty that Lucas couldn't fathom, a complete disregard for the woman who had given them everything. The realization that this was not just negligence, but a deliberate plan to harm Clara, left Lucas feeling both enraged and helpless. He knew he had to act, but the enormity of the situation weighed heavily on him. As he watched the footage, Lucas couldn't help but think back to the moments when Clara had expressed her concerns, her fears that something was wrong. He had reassured her, told her not to worry, but now he saw just how justified those fears had been. Clara had sensed the danger, even if she couldn't articulate it fully, and Lucas felt a deep sense of guilt for not realizing it sooner. The thought of what could have happened if he hadn't returned home in time filled him with dread. Lucas knew that he couldn't afford to wait any longer. He had to confront Bruno and Eduardo before their plan could be put into action. The camera had captured every detail of their conversations, their callous laughter, their smug assurance that they could get away with it. Lucas knew that this footage was the key to stopping them, but it also represented something far more devastating, the undeniable proof that his brothers had lost their humanity. The trust that had once existed between them was shattered beyond repair, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal that Lucas knew he could never forgive. The weight of this realization pressed down on him, making it difficult to breathe. But amidst the shock and sorrow, Lucas also felt a growing resolve. He would not let them get away with this. Lucas spent the next few hours meticulously reviewing the footage, making copies, and organizing the evidence. He knew that he couldn't act rashly. He needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The recordings were his mother's lifeline, the only thing standing between her and the nightmare that Bruno and Eduardo had planned. As he worked, Lucas felt a cold determination settle over him. There would be no forgiveness, no second chances. His brothers had made their choice, and now they would have to face the consequences. Lucas wasn't just fighting for Clara's safety. He was fighting for justice, for the truth to be known. With the evidence securely stored, Lucas prepared for the confrontation that was to come. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Bruno and Eduardo would likely deny everything, try to twist the truth to suit their narrative. But Lucas had the one thing they couldn't refute, the undeniable truth captured on camera. As he steeled himself for the battle ahead, Lucas felt a mixture of fear and determination. This wasn't just about exposing their plan. It was about protecting Clara and ensuring that she could live the rest of her days in peace and dignity. And Lucas was prepared to do whatever it took to make that happen. As Lucas continued to watch the hidden camera footage, the full extent of his brother's conspiracy became painfully clear. Bruno and Eduardo were not just negligent. They were deeply entangled in a sinister plot that seemed more like something out of a crime novel than a family's reality. The recordings captured them in the act of scheming, discussing in chilling detail how they would drug Clara, fabricate medical reports, and manipulate her into believing she was losing her mind. They planned to convince others that Clara's mental state was deteriorating, justifying their decision to place her in an asilo where they could control every aspect of her life, including her pension. Their conversations were filled with a kind of dark humor that made Lucas's skin crawl. Bruno, the elder of the two, seemed to take the lead, his voice dripping with malice as he laid out the steps they would take to ensure that Clara would have no choice but to comply. Eduardo, though quieter, was no less complicit, nodding in agreement and occasionally adding his own cruel suggestions. The brothers spoke as if they were planning a business deal, their mother's well-being reduced to a mere obstacle in their path to financial gain. It was a betrayal of the deepest kind, one that left Lucas grappling with a mix of fury and disbelief. The more Lucas listened, the more he realized just how far his brothers were willing to go. They spoke of isolating Clara from the outside world, cutting off her communication with friends and family so that no one could intervene. They even discussed the possibility of forging legal documents to gain control of her assets, ensuring that Clara would have no power to resist. It was a calculated plan, designed to strip Clara of her autonomy and render her completely dependent on them. Lucas's heart ached as he imagined his mother, alone and confused, trapped in a situation where she had no one to turn to. The thought of her enduring such cruelty was almost too much to bear. Lucas knew that confronting his brothers directly would be dangerous. Bruno and Eduardo were clearly capable of deceit and manipulation, and they would likely deny everything if given the chance. But Lucas also knew that he couldn't wait any longer. The longer he stayed silent, the closer his brothers would get to executing their plan. He had to act swiftly, using the evidence he had gathered to protect Clara and bring Bruno and Eduardo to justice. This was not just about stopping a conspiracy. It was about saving his mother from a fate she did not deserve. As Lucas prepared for the inevitable confrontation, he couldn't help but reflect on how things had come to this point. He had always known that his brothers were selfish, but he had never imagined they were capable of such cruelty. The recordings were a stark reminder that people could change, that the bonds of family could be corrupted by greed and envy. Lucas felt a deep sadness for the brothers he had once loved, now reduced to villains in their own mother's life. But he also felt a growing resolve. This was not a time for pity or hesitation. Clara's life was at stake, and Lucas was determined to do whatever it took to protect her. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only expose the truth, but also determine the future of their family. Lucas knew that once he confronted his brothers, there would be no going back. The relationships they had once shared would be irreparably damaged, but Lucas was willing to accept that loss, if it meant saving his mother. He steeled himself for what was to come, knowing that the battle ahead would be difficult but necessary. With the evidence in hand and a plan in place, Lucas prepared to face his brothers and put an end to their sinister conspiracy. Clara's world, already fraught with loneliness and neglect, was about to be shattered in a way she could never have anticipated. One evening, as she sat quietly in her living room, she overheard a conversation that would change everything. Bruno and Eduardo, assuming she was asleep, began discussing their plans with a level of callousness that made Clara's blood run cold. At first, she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Their voices, once so full of affection and warmth, were now laced with cruelty as they outlined their intentions to drug her and confine her to an asilo. They spoke of her as if she were a mere inconvenience, an obstacle in their quest for control over her pension and assets. The shock of hearing her own sons plot against her was overwhelming. Clara felt her heart race as their words sank in, each sentence a dagger to her soul. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving her gasping for breath, struggling to comprehend the depth of their betrayal. She had always suspected that something was amiss, but never in her darkest dreams had she imagined this level of deceit. The realization that her sons, the children she had nurtured and loved, were capable of such cold-heartedness left her reeling. Clara felt a wave of nausea, a physical response to the emotional devastation she was experiencing. As she continued to listen, Clara's initial shock gave way to a deep, searing pain. The conversation revealed not just their plans to drug her, but also their intentions to isolate her from the world. They spoke of cutting off her contact with friends, of making sure no one would believe her if she tried to reach out for help. The cruelty in their voices was unmistakable, and it hit Clara like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her in despair. But amidst the pain, a fierce determination began to take root. Clara knew she had to do something. She couldn't let them succeed. She had to find a way to protect herself, to fight back against the very sons she had once cherished. The moments that followed were a blur as Clara tried to process what she had just heard. She felt a dizzying mix of emotions, fear, anger, sorrow, all swirling within her, making it hard to think clearly. But one thing was certain. Clara could no longer trust Bruno and Eduardo. The sons she had once believed would always be there for her had become her enemies, plotting to strip her of her freedom and dignity. The betrayal was almost too much to bear, but Clara knew that giving in to despair would only make her more vulnerable. She had to stay strong, to find a way to turn the tables on them before it was too late. Clara's mind raced as she considered her options. She knew that confronting Bruno and Eduardo directly would be dangerous. They had already shown their willingness to deceive and manipulate her. But she also knew that she couldn't stay silent. She needed help, and quickly. The memory of Lucas, her adopted son, flashed through her mind. Lucas had always been her rock, the one who never hesitated to protect her. Clara realized that he was her only hope. She needed to find a way to reach him, to let him know what was happening before her sons could carry out their sinister plan. The thought gave her a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. Determined to take action, Clara began to devise a plan of her own. She would pretend that nothing was amiss, continuing to play the role of the oblivious mother while secretly working to contact Lucas. Every move would have to be calculated, every word carefully chosen, to avoid raising suspicion. Clara knew that she was walking a tightrope, but she was determined not to fall. She would fight for her life, for her dignity, and for the justice that she deserved. The days ahead would be challenging, but Clara was ready. She had no choice but to summon every ounce of strength and resilience she had, for the battle had only just begun. The moment Lucas had been preparing for had finally arrived. Armed with the damning footage, he set his plan into motion with precision and resolve. Lucas knew that simply confronting Bruno and Eduardo in private wouldn't be enough. Their lies and manipulations had to be exposed in the harsh light of public scrutiny. With Clara's safety hanging in the balance, he decided to confront them in a way that would leave no room for denial or escape, a live broadcast. It was a bold move, but Lucas understood that the only way to protect Clara and ensure justice was to make their betrayal visible to the world. The day of the confrontation, Lucas felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with a cold determination. He arranged for a live stream to be set up, discreetly positioning cameras in the living room where the confrontation would take place. Clara, now fully aware of the plan, played her part perfectly, greeting Bruno and Eduardo with the same warmth they were used to, masking the storm that was about to descend. The brothers, oblivious to what was coming, sat down with a casual arrogance, unaware that they were about to be exposed. As the stream went live, Lucas didn't waste any time. He confronted them directly, his voice steady but laced with controlled anger. "I know everything," he began, locking eyes with Bruno and Eduardo, who suddenly looked less confident. "I've seen the footage. I know what you've been planning." The shock on their faces was palpable as they realized they were being recorded, their betrayal laid bare for anyone watching. Lucas didn't let up. He detailed every part of their scheme, from the drugs to the asilo to their plans to isolate Clara. The evidence was undeniable, and for the first time Bruno and Eduardo were speechless. As Lucas continued, the viewers, family, friends, and even strangers who had tuned in watched in real time as the true nature of Bruno and Eduardo's actions was revealed. The brothers, cornered and exposed, tried to defend themselves, but their words rang hollow. The live stream captured every moment of their downfall, their attempts at denial only making them look more guilty. The tension in the room was thick, but Lucas remained composed, his focus on ensuring that everyone watching understood the gravity of what had been done. The betrayal was no longer a family secret. It was now a public scandal, one that would have lasting consequences. Clara, sitting quietly as the confrontation unfolded, felt a mix of emotions: relief, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of justice. Seeing Bruno and Eduardo squirm under the weight of their own lies was a bitter validation of the pain they had caused. But more than that, it was a moment of empowerment for Clara. She had been powerless for so long, at the mercy of her son's neglect and cruelty. Now, thanks to Lucas's bold strategy, the power had shifted. The world knew the truth, and Clara could finally breathe, knowing that she was no longer alone in her fight for dignity and justice. The live stream ended with the arrival of the police, who had been watching the events unfold alongside the viewers. Bruno and Eduardo were arrested on the spot, the evidence against them overwhelming. As they were led away in handcuffs, Lucas turned to Clara, who looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. It was a victory, but it had come at a great cost. The family was shattered, the bonds between them broken beyond repair. But in that moment, Clara knew that justice had been served, and that was what mattered most. The public had seen the truth, and there would be no going back. With the confrontation behind them, Lucas and Clara were left to pick up the pieces of their lives. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges they had yet to face. But they would face them together, no longer in the shadow of betrayal but in the light of truth. Lucas knew that their journey was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next. The battle had been won, but the war for Clara's peace of mind and recovery was just beginning. And Lucas was determined to see it through, every step of the way. With Bruno and Eduardo in custody, the legal process moved swiftly. The evidence gathered by Lucas, particularly the live stream that had captured their betrayal in real time, left little room for doubt. The court proceedings were brief, with the overwhelming proof of their guilt leading to a quick and decisive outcome. The recordings, the detailed plans, and the cold, calculated way they had conspired against their own mother were all laid bare before the judge and jury. The public, having followed the story through the live stream, watched closely as justice was served. Bruno and Eduardo were found guilty of multiple charges, including conspiracy, elder abuse, and fraud. The sentencing was harsh as it needed to be, given the severity of their actions. Bruno and Eduardo were each sentenced to several years in prison, their lives now defined by the consequences of their greed and betrayal. The judge's words were stern, condemning their actions as not just illegal but morally reprehensible. Clara, sitting in the courtroom with Lucas by her side, listened quietly as the verdict was read. It was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been done, but the price had been high. The sons she had once loved were now criminals, their futures shattered by their own hands. As they were led away in handcuffs, Bruno and Eduardo exchanged a final glance with Clara. It was a look of regret, perhaps even shame, but it came too late. Clara felt a pang of sorrow for what might have been, but she knew there was no turning back. Their choices had led them down a dark path, and now they would have to pay the price. The courtroom, filled with onlookers and media, buzzed with the weight of what had just transpired. It was a clear message to all. Justice would prevail, even in the most personal and painful of circumstances. Lucas, who had been instrumental in bringing about this justice, felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The battle had been long and grueling, but he had succeeded in protecting Clara and ensuring that those responsible were held accountable. The public outcry against Bruno and Eduardo was strong, with many expressing outrage at how they had treated their mother. But amidst the anger and condemnation, there was also admiration for Lucas, who had shown courage and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. His actions had not only saved Clara, but had also set a precedent, reminding everyone that no one is above the law. With the legal process concluded, Lucas and Clara could finally begin to move forward. The weight of the trial, the media attention, and the emotional toll of the entire ordeal had left them both drained. But there was also a sense of closure, a recognition that justice had been served and that they could now start to rebuild their lives. Lucas knew that it wouldn't be easy. There were wounds that would take time to heal and memories that would never fully fade. But he was ready to support Clara in any way she needed, to help her find peace after the storm. The public, who had followed the story from the beginning, continued to show their support for Clara and Lucas. Messages of encouragement and solidarity poured in, with many people expressing their admiration for Clara's strength and Lucas's determination. It was a testament to the power of truth and the importance of standing up for what is right, even when the odds are stacked against you. As Clara and Lucas left the courthouse, they were greeted by a crowd of supporters, a reminder that they were not alone in their fight. Justice had been done, and now they could finally look toward the future with hope. The emotional and psychological toll of the betrayal had left deep scars, but with Lucas by her side, she knew she could start the healing process. Lucas, always the pillar of support, had arranged for Raphael, a highly recommended nurse with a gentle demeanor, to assist Clara during this difficult time. Raphael wasn't just a professional. He was someone who truly cared about his patients, bringing a sense of comfort and reassurance that Clara desperately needed. His presence marked the beginning of a new chapter in Clara's life, one focused on healing and reclaiming her independence. Raphael quickly became an integral part of Clara's daily routine, helping her regain her strength both physically and emotionally. His approach was holistic, focusing not just on Clara's physical well-being but also on her mental health. He encouraged her to engage in activities that she had once enjoyed but had abandoned during the darker days of her life. With gentle persistence, Raphael helped Clara rediscover the joy in simple things, like reading her favorite books, tending to the small garden in her backyard, and even taking short walks in the fresh air. These activities, though small, played a crucial role in Clara's recovery, helping her rebuild a sense of normalcy and purpose. The relationship between Clara and Raphael grew beyond that of patient and caregiver. Raphael became a confidant, someone Clara could talk to about her fears and hopes without judgment. He listened with empathy, offering support and encouragement whenever Clara felt overwhelmed by the memories of her son's betrayal. Raphael's kindness and patience provided a stark contrast to the cruelty she had endured, reminding Clara that there were still good people in the world who genuinely cared about her well-being. Over time, this bond became a cornerstone of Clara's recovery, giving her the strength to move forward with her life. Lucas, too, played a vital role in Clara's healing. He was there for her every step of the way, offering the love and support that she had so desperately needed. Together, Lucas and Raphael created a safe and nurturing environment for Clara, one where she could slowly rebuild her shattered confidence. They encouraged her to take each day as it came, celebrating small victories and gently guiding her through the challenges that arose. Clara's progress, though slow, was steady, and with each passing day she grew stronger, both in body and spirit. The darkness that had once consumed her life began to lift, replaced by a growing sense of hope and resilience. The road to recovery was not without its setbacks. There were days when Clara felt overwhelmed by the memories of what had happened, when the weight of her son's betrayal seemed too much to bear. But on those days, Raphael and Lucas were there to lift her up, reminding her of the progress she had made and the bright future that still lay ahead. Clara learned to lean on them, to trust in their support, and to allow herself to be vulnerable in a way she hadn't before. This vulnerability, once a source of fear, became a source of strength, as Clara realized that she didn't have to face her challenges alone. As weeks turned into months, Clara's recovery continued to progress. She began to see Raphael and Lucas not just as her caregivers but as her family, a family bound not by blood but by the shared experience of overcoming adversity together. The bond they had formed was unbreakable, forged in the fires of hardship and tempered by mutual respect and love. Clara knew that she still had a long way to go, but with Lucas and Raphael by her side, she felt ready to face whatever the future might bring. Her journey toward recovery was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Clara felt truly hopeful about what lay ahead. As Clara continued her journey toward recovery, the story of her ordeal and the subsequent justice served began to spread beyond her immediate circle. Lucas, who had played such a pivotal role in exposing the betrayal and ensuring justice was done, found himself at the center of public attention. What had started as a deeply personal battle became a story that resonated with people far and wide. Lucas's unwavering commitment to his mother and his strategic approach to confronting his brothers captured the public's imagination, turning him into a figure of admiration and inspiration. Invitations began pouring in, from television interviews to public speaking engagements, all wanting to hear more about his journey. It wasn't long before a well-known publishing house approached Lucas with an offer to write a book about his experience. They saw in him a compelling story of courage, justice, and familial bonds tested to their limits. Initially hesitant, Lucas took some time to reflect on the offer. Writing a book would mean revisiting painful memories and sharing them with the world, but it also offered an opportunity to shed light on issues that many families face in silence. After much consideration, Lucas decided to move forward with the project, seeing it as a way to honor Clara's strength and to bring awareness to the importance of protecting the elderly from abuse and neglect. The process of writing the book was both cathartic and challenging for Lucas. He worked closely with a seasoned ghostwriter who helped him navigate the complexities of turning his story into a narrative that would engage and inspire readers. The book delved deep into the emotional and psychological aspects of the ordeal, offering not just a recounting of events, but also insights into the broader implications of elder abuse and the legal battles that often accompany it. Lucas wanted the book to be more than just a memoir. He aimed to create a resource that could help others in similar situations, providing them with the knowledge and courage to fight back. As the book neared completion, the anticipation surrounding its release grew. Lucas had already gained a following through his public appearances, and many were eager to hear his story in full. The book's release was met with widespread acclaim, praised not only for its gripping narrative, but also for the way it highlighted the often overlooked issue of elder abuse. Lucas's story struck a chord with many readers, particularly those who had experienced similar situations in their own families. The book became a bestseller, solidifying Lucas's place as a public figure and advocate for the elderly. In addition to the book, Lucas began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and seminars focused on elder care and legal protections for vulnerable populations. His insights, drawn from personal experience, resonated deeply with audiences, many of whom were inspired to take action in their own communities. Lucas used these platforms not only to share his story, but also to advocate for stronger protections for the elderly, pushing for reforms in both legal and healthcare systems to better safeguard those who could not protect themselves. His work became a catalyst for change, sparking conversations and initiatives aimed at preventing elder abuse on a broader scale. Throughout all of this, Clara watched with pride as her son took on this new role. She saw how Lucas had transformed their painful experience into something powerful and positive, helping others while also healing himself. The recognition he received was well-deserved, but more importantly, it was a testament to the strength of their bond and the power of standing up for what is right. Clara knew that Lucas's work was far from finished, but she also knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The public recognition was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one filled with hope, purpose, and a shared commitment to making a difference. As Lucas's public recognition grew, so did his appreciation for those who had supported him and Clara throughout their ordeal. Among these individuals, Raphael, the nurse who had been so instrumental in Clara's recovery, stood out as someone who had gone above and beyond in his care. Raphael had not only provided exceptional medical attention, but he had also offered emotional support, becoming a true friend and confidant to Clara. His dedication and kindness had made a profound impact on both Clara and Lucas knew he wanted to show his gratitude in a meaningful way. Lucas began thinking about how he could repay Raphael for everything he had done. He learned that Raphael was a single father, raising a young daughter on his own while working tirelessly to support them. Despite the challenges, Raphael had never wavered in his commitment to his patients, and his warmth and compassion had left a lasting impression on everyone he encountered. Inspired by Raphael's selflessness, Lucas decided that he wanted to do something that would truly make a difference in Raphael's life, a gesture that would reflect the depth of his gratitude. After some careful consideration, Lucas decided to purchase an apartment for Raphael and his daughter. It was a gesture of generosity that came from the heart, meant to provide Raphael with the stability and security that he had worked so hard to achieve. When Lucas presented the apartment to Raphael, he was met with disbelief and overwhelming emotion. Raphael, who had never expected anything in return for his care, was deeply touched by Lucas's generosity. The apartment was more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of the bond that had formed between them during one of the most challenging times in Clara's life. The gift of the apartment not only provided Raphael and his daughter with a comfortable home, but also gave them the opportunity to build a better future. The stability it offered meant that Raphael could focus on his career and on being the best father he could be, without the constant worry of financial strain. For Lucas, seeing the joy and relief on Raphael's face was more than enough reward. It was a moment that encapsulated the power of kindness and the impact that one person's actions can have on another's life. Lucas knew that this was the right way to express his thanks, not just with words, but with a gesture that would have a lasting positive impact. As word of Lucas's generosity spread, it only added to his reputation as someone who cared deeply for those around him. The public, already impressed by his courage and determination, now saw him as a figure of generosity and compassion. But for Lucas, the act was simply a natural extension of the gratitude he felt. He had been through so much with Clara, and in Raphael he saw a kindred spirit, someone who was willing to go to great lengths to care for others. The bond between Lucas and Raphael, forged through shared experiences and mutual respect, was something that would endure long after the challenges they had faced together were behind them. The gesture also had a profound effect on Clara, who was deeply moved by Lucas's act of kindness. It reaffirmed her belief in the goodness of people and in the importance of giving back to those who have helped you along the way. Clara, who had seen the worst of human nature in her own sons, now witnessed the best in Lucas and Raphael. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always light to be found, and that acts of kindness can have a ripple effect, spreading positivity far and wide. For Clara, this was a fitting conclusion to her journey of recovery, a journey that had been made possible by the love and support of those around her. As Clara and Lucas's story comes to a close, we are reminded of the power of resilience, love, and the importance of standing up for what is right. The journey they've been through is one that many can relate to on some level, a battle against betrayal, the fight for justice, and the long road to recovery. But what stands out most is how they turned their painful experience into something positive, something that could inspire others to take action in their own lives. Now it's your turn to reflect on what you've learned from this story. Have you ever faced a situation where you felt alone or betrayed? How did you respond? Perhaps you're dealing with something right now that feels overwhelming. If there's one thing Clara's story teaches us, it's that no matter how dark things may seem, there is always hope. But hope alone isn't enough. We must also take action, just as Lucas did. So what steps can you take today to improve your situation? Who can you reach out to for help or support? Think about the people in your life who might need you right now. Maybe it's a parent, a friend, or even a stranger who's going through a tough time. How can you show them that they're not alone? Sometimes the smallest gestures can make the biggest difference. And if you've been inspired by Lucas's courage and generosity, consider how you can apply those same principles in your own life. Whether it's standing up against injustice, offering a helping hand, or simply being there for someone who needs you, your actions have the power to change lives. I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Clara and Lucas's story resonated with you the most? Do you have a similar experience or any advice you'd like to share with others? Your insights could be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on more stories and lessons like this one. Together, we can create a community that supports and uplifts each other one step at a time. So what will you do today to make a difference? The choice is yours and the time is now.